Hey everyone, I'm Lyle Burks with the Viking Speaks. And this is the 48 Laws of Power. Hey everyone, I'm Lyle Burks with the Viking Speaks. Welcome back to day 64 of the 90-day video challenge. Today we have Law 22 of the 48 Laws of Power. Use a surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power. When you're weaker, never fight for honor's sake. Choose surrender instead. Surrender gives you time to recover, time to torment and irritate your conqueror, time to wait for his power to wane. Do not give him the satisfaction of fighting and defeating you. Surrender first. By turning the other cheek, you infuriate and unsettle him. Make surrender a tool of power. So he begins this story with an actual transgression of the law. Go back to ancient Greek times where the Athenians dominated the coastal areas and most of the Mediterranean. Now they conquered everything except for Sparta and the Peloponnese. Sparta in the Peloponnese, who originally the colony of Melos. The Spartans originally colonized Melos. So in this conversation, it's between the Melians and the Athenians. And there's going back and forth. The Melians were a weaker force. And what the Athenians were offering was a peaceful recolonization of the Melians by essentially institutionalizing their system with the Athenian law and their cultures and ways, their customs. Well, the Melians refused. They didn't want to yield to the Athenian authority, knowing that they had a much stronger military force and could easily come in and take over. They went down the road of honor. They said the Spartans will come to our rescue. They were our original colonizers and they will come to our aid for honor's sake. The Athenians were pretty logical people, and they urged the Melians to think twice about making that decision because the Spartans really had nothing to gain from coming to the aid of their weaker, once upon a time colony. But they had a lot to lose, not only in manpower, but in honor and pride, as well as a massive financial risk for taking on a war. So, Melians stuck to the guns and they decided, nope, we're not going to listen to you. We know our honor-bound brethren over there, the Spartans, are going to come to our aid and we'll be fine. So, Athenians gave them fair warning. And they set the tone and they eventually attacked. And for a few days, the Melians put up a pretty good fight, but eventually they were overtaken by the Athenians. And the Athenians, they crushed their enemy totally. They made no exemptions. Anyone who was a man, who was of potential military age, was killed. Most beheaded. And all the children and the women were sold into slavery. All because the Melians, they stuck to honor and pride instead of recognizing when to yield and waiting out the Athenians, who would later, a few years down the road, lose their power. They were no longer the force they once were, and they could have infiltrated from the inside out, maintained their lands, maintained their people and their lives, their way of life, and completely done away with the Athenians from the top down. But they learned that lesson, unfortunately, the hardest way. Now, the alternative side, the observance of the law. If you've ever heard of Bertolt Brecht, back in the 1920s, after the first iteration of the German Reich, he became a communist sympathizer. And he was a playwright and everything, and he was in the entertainment industry. When Hitler came to power, he decided, I don't want anything to do with this, I'm out. So he got the heck out of there, came to the United States. He landed in Los Angeles and began to work in Hollywood. So eventually writing a few plays and movies and things of that nature. And there were a few people who had a similar mindset in that particular time. Now, in the 1940s, the United States began to look into un-American activities, and they even set up committees specifically designed to look at that. And they deemed communist activity as un-American, against everything that capitalist America stood for. Well, Brecht had been very outspoken against capitalism at the time, and he, among 18 others in the Hollywood area, they were eventually subpoenaed to court 1 month prior to Brecht returning to Europe for good. After the war ended and Hitler was defeated and his original German state, which Brecht was originally from Germany, he was going to go home and get the heck out of Dodge because he ruffled a few feathers. Well, he got subpoenaed and brought in, and those people were known as the Hollywood 19. So prior to their court date, the Hollywood 19 met and they came up with a game plan. They all came together, and what they originally decided to do was, well, what if we just refuse to answer questions and defy them at every turn and stick to our cause, and we'll gain massive publicity and everything, and it'll be good for the overall cause, right? Well, Brecht felt that was a foolish thing to do, and he turned to the other 18 personnel and said, any one of us is smarter than that committee. Why not outsmart them with subtlety and undermine the very authority of the committee itself without them ever realizing? Well, the other 18 thought this was a bad idea, and he warned them and tried to tell them, look, I think this is the way to go. Trust me, you're going to be much better suited catching flies with honey than you are vinegar. So they said, you know what, we're going to do us, you do you, good luck. So the other personnel were all interviewed and everything, and Brecht finally got his day in court October 30th of 1947. And when he was interviewed, time and time again, they expected him to be just like all the others, rude, arrogant, being insulting, and hurling slurs at them, and just constantly bad-mouthing the entirety of not only the committee, but the United States as a whole. Well, Brecht took the opposite tactic. While everybody else was being insulting and offensive, he put on a nice suit, came in smoking a cigar after he had learned that one of the committee members was an avid cigar smoker and very fond of that, struck up a conversation with that, and was on his best behavior. Polite, answered every question they asked, never fussed, and kept a very calm temperament. When asked about several of his poems that he had written and his outspoken, clearly Marxist views, he used the tactic of subtlety, appearing weak and appearing naive almost. And they asked when they read an English version of his poem, that was very clearly leaning towards the communist cause. He said, did you write this? He said, no. I wrote a very different German poem. They never balked at that at all. They never even flinched. So there was one particular phrase, paragraph in here I wanted to read to you. It said, so it goes back to talking about how he was dressed and all this. It says, unlike other witnesses, Brecht answered questions and whether he belonged to the Communist Party. He was not a member, he said, which happened to be the truth. One committee member asked him, is it true that you have written a number of revolutionary plays? Brecht had written Brecht had written many plays over communist messages. But he responded, I have written a number of poems and songs and plays in the fight against Hitler, and of course, they can be considered revolutionary. Therefore, because I of course wanted to overthrow that government. Well, this statement went unchallenged. So he went in there and he was asked specifically if he was a member of the party. He said, no, I'm good. I'm not a member. He favored that party, but he was never a member. So he wasn't lying. And yeah, he wrote revolutionary type plays leaning towards the communist ideals. But when he used the generalization of, yeah, they're revolutionary because I didn't believe in Hitler and I wanted that government gone, he never said what government he wanted to replace it. And all said and done, at the end of the interview, the committee thanked him for his cooperation. They offered him assistance in his travels, and they said if any of the other agencies have any issue with you and they stop you on your way out, please let us know, we'll be happy to help. And they congratulated him on his way for being an example that the remainder of the Hollywood 19 should follow. As a result, within a month, he was back in Europe and he never returned to the United States. So, good example of turning theoretical weakness into power. Almost kind of like the Trojan horse. A gift made to a seemingly more powerful army. Let your guard down, you let the enemy in, and then you take over from the inside out. So, interesting stories tonight. Hope y'all enjoyed them. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Much love. Back it up.